You told John Roberts the other day China. You saw evidence that gave you a high confidence that the virus came from the Wuhan lab. Not that it was created there, perhaps, but that it came from there.
At the right time,
Can you illuminate any more about that?
Yeah, we're going to be given a very strong report as to exactly what we think happened. And I think it'll be very conclusive.
Is there any suggestion that it was anything nefarious or that it was just a mistake?
So I think they made a horrible mistake, and they didn't want to admit it. We wanted to go in. They didn't want us there.
These are not the first times that we've had a world exposed to viruses as a result of failures in a Chinese lab. And so while the intelligence community continues to do its work, they should continue to do that and verify so that we are certain. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
The Trump administration yesterday stepping up its attacks on China and that lab, but their assessment that the virus began in a lab in Wuhan is not one shared at this point by U.S. intelligence officials who spoke to NBC News, saying there is no, quote, smoking gun evidence pointing them in that direction, and there may never be. These comments following the U.S. intel community statement last week that they do not believe the virus was man-made. And Washington Post reporting that said, quote, while intelligence analysts and many scientists see the lab as origin theory is technically possible, no direct evidence has emerged suggesting that the virus escaped from Wuhan's research facilities. So even if the theories are not mutually exclusive, that a virus originating from a natural transmission could also have come from a lab, Donald Trump and his administration have yet to reveal any evidence at all backing up their repeated claims that they are so strongly sticking to and touting publicly. Joining us now, former Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at the FBI, Frank Figliuzzi, and Kim Atkins, Senior Correspondent for Boston's public news station, WBUR. Frank Figliuzzi, what do you see? What do you think is going on?
Well, I think a couple of things are going on, and none of them are good. First, I think we're looking at what I'm calling the China trap, which is that politically, the Republicans are going to try to force the hands of the Democrats by saying it's an either-or equation. You either are with China or you're with the president. And I'm here to remind people like Biden and Pelosi that you don't need to fall for that trap. You can simultaneously distrust everything coming out of China, and you should be critiquing and questioning everything coming out of the Trump administration. This country of ours has gone to war in our lifetime, Nicole, invaded other countries because of either fabricated intelligence, faulty intelligence, or ignored intelligence. I only need to remind folks about our invasion of Iraq, and that at the time we did that, Saddam Hussein was found by the intelligence community after the fact to not have truly possessed weapons of mass destruction. I'm not saying we're about to go to war with China. I'm saying I think we're about to see the perversion of the intelligence process for a political benefit, and I'm very, very concerned about it.
Amen. Amen. I am concerned about it too. Because whenever it gets this jagged and this rocky, anything can be produced or subproduced out of these type of equations that we don't know if they're accurate or not. You know, whenever you get to looking at fake news isn't something that just started yesterday. And there has been people that went to war over misguided information. Just like there's been people that went to war over in Libya and places like that has purposely gassed and poisoned their own people. Whenever you're talking about something this serious, anything is on the table right now. And that's the part that is so mind-boggling, and really it's frightening in a sense that if we was to wind up losing it to the point of actually blows being struck between China or America, it could result in a disaster. No ifs, ands, buts about it.
I want you.
It would actually escalate into something worser than with Iran. And Iran is a bad enough tinderbox waiting to happen. We've actually got two fronts right now. We've got Iran and we got China. And you can say whatever you want to about North Korea, but I feel like that North Korea knew something was up towards them, kept saying something about a Christmas gift, a Christmas gift. We got you a Christmas gift coming. And of course, Donald Trump took it as some sort of love letters. You don't mess with them people over there. Them people over there don't think like we think. The people in China would come here thinking like the people in Iraq or Iran than they would think in the way that the American people think. They do not care about life. Only thing they care about is prosperity and feeding their own pockets. Under any circumstance.
To say more, and I take your point about, I think you're making a point about WMD and Iraq and the actions our government took, but I want you to say more about not going to war per se with China. We may very well need their help if a vaccine is created and we want to inoculate our entire country. I mean, just talk about the stakes of this sort of escalating rhetoric about China.
Well, I have to wonder, without being overly dramatic, whether the stakes have ever been higher with regard to the president's adherence to intelligence and whether or not reporting is accurate. We're talking about having already more deaths than during the Vietnam War. So when our scientists and epidemiologists are trying to race toward a vaccine, it helps if they know where this thing came from, what it looked like originally and how it has mutated, who patient zero really was or was not. This is a time when we need to actually cozy up to China and cajole them into letting us in and telling us the truth. So now when you hide behind what must be extremely classified intelligence, if it even exists at all, we're talking intercepts, we're talking human sources inside China. And if in fact they're reporting that, hey, this came from the lab, well, now we can see a game being played. Well, the White House will say, we can't expose these very sensitive sources, but you need to trust us. Well, guess what? This is a time where you need to lay the cards on the table. The other thing, Nicole, is I'm looking to what we call the Five Eyes in the intelligence business, the other close allies of us, UK, Australia, New Zealand, right? And I hear nothing coming out of those allied services saying, hey, we also are hearing it came from the lab. We're hearing zero from them.
You know, Kim, two questions for you. One, this feels like such treacherous territory to be on. Already, there have been reports in the New York Times and LA Times and other news organizations about just this uptick in xenophobic attitudes and behavior toward Asian Americans. And the second would be that it is just another example. There are more instances of Donald Trump not believing the intel than believing them. So the fact that he and Pompeo are out on a limb, they've already been reeled in terms of a public statement put out by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence saying that's not where the community is. It just, you know, where there's smoke, there isn't always fire, but there's certainly a lot of smoke around their comments about China.
Absolutely. And you're right. To your first point, there is a real consequence of jumping out ahead of the intelligence to blame China for things that we don't know they've actually done. As you said, that there has already been an increase in incidents against Chinese Americans and Asian Americans, not just here in America, but across the world. You also have the World Health Organization warning against assigning a geographic location to the name of this. But still, this isn't new. This is a part of a pattern on the part of both President Trump and Secretary of State Pompeo. Recall back in March at the G7 summit, Secretary Pompeo was calling the virus the Wuhan virus, and other G7 leaders declined to do the same. This was the same time that President Trump from the podium at the White House was calling it the Chinese virus. So there was always been this urge, this desire on the part of the White House to blame China for this. The president always says that he banned travel from China and that saved millions of lives without providing any evidence of that. He didn't ban travel, he limited it, but just really trying to put the blame there and away from the administration. So in that sense, it has been part of a pattern that Secretary of State Pompeo has been more than willing to engage in.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to talk about the well-worn tracks through the State Department of a dark political op. I mean, Pompeo was the guy on the phone when Donald Trump asked the leader of Ukraine to dirty up Joe Biden and to run those politically motivated investigations before he would release congressionally approved military aid. So Pompeo is a repeat character, if you will. Any surprises there, Kim?
No, I mean, Pompeo has been somebody who has been a staunch supporter of this president, both on policy and in rhetoric and style. I mean, he's quite the departure of the president's first Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, with whom the president openly sparred frequently. In this case, the president has gotten someone who is willing to speak and walk the walk exactly the way the president does, even when it does not fall directly in line with U.S. intelligence, and that is one reason to be concerned. Now, without question, no one is saying that China is blameless. There is a lot of questions. Certainly, China has done a lot of things that are problematic, like ousting journalists and scientists who tried to blow the whistle on their mishandling of the coronavirus. But in this case, the way that the Secretary of State is in lockstep with the president, even when it's not in lockstep with intelligence, is noteworthy.
We're going to have to quit. We're going to have to stop being the devil's advocate towards taking up for the devil's work that the devil has placed upon to society. We're going to have a strong bone to call wicked and evil versus calling good good. And until we hold people accountable, there is too many elements that China done with their own personnel. They was getting irritated for two different reasons. They was getting irritated because their own people kept wanting to protest against their communist-controlled country, and they wanted free, open democracy like the majority of the people. Plus, China was getting irritated because of Donald Trump and all the tariffs. They was being bombarded on two different levels at the same time towards feeling like that they was under attack. And I can understand the reason why that their officials over in China felt like that they was under attack. If I was one of them dictators, one of those tyrants, and all this was going on in my country, as well as Donald Trump bringing all these tariffs, I would feel the same way, and probably, possibly anybody else would too as well. The incentive or the motive is there for them to have done something outlandish. We do the exact same thing whenever we have a trial, a murder trial here in America. We want to look for the possibilities, okay? If you're going to convict somebody, you need to have a motive. Why would have that person done what that person done towards taking that person's life? Was it a big insurance claim? Did they already have a relationship with that person? Was it something to deal with money or greed or old past vendetta? Was it a boyfriend or a girlfriend? We do the exact same thing on a one-on-one level pertaining to a murder, looking for opportunities or motives that opens up a brand new venue, a brand new door by saying, well, you know what, they had the motive here. Now, whether or not they actually done it or not, we know that they had the motive. Okay, you look at China. China was becoming frustrated with their own people. We had Kim Jong, or whoever he is, that kept talking about love letters and a Christmas present. At the same time, we had a president that was putting the squeeze off on various officials pertaining to cornering the market in regard towards free trade versus fair trade. The pressure was on China on two different levels, by their own people and by the president. So you have to ask yourself the question, why would they have not have retaliated in some sort of way, either out of fear or out of a vendetta toward trying to get back at us? Because China did know that the virus was this crucial and this lethal, and they chose to continue to keep bringing the airplanes from China over to America. Naturally, Donald Trump is going to fall for their entrapment because he didn't realize the degree at first, or he claims that he didn't, the degree at first towards the severity of all this, and he did not stop traffic coming from China originally. He only postponed some of the trips or delayed part of the trips coming from China, because you keep in mind, we not only have cargo coming from China on boat, we have cargo coming from China on big airplanes. They bring supplies to us. It's part of the supply chain coming from China. I don't know if it's wise for the president to speculate. But I know this. The president failed the people. And I'm just not talking about the American people. I'm talking about the world people. The president of the United States of America failed the worldly people. But also so did China. China failed the worldly people by not disclosing the severity of this coronavirus. Now, rather not the containment lab was done accidentally or intentionally, that's another debate that people are going to have to look at in figuring out the do's and the don'ts. But the motive is there. The incentive for them to have done this purposely, intentionally, is there. And if the world finds out that it was done intentionally, this will be grounds of a war. Regardless whether you like war or not, I'm telling you now, this will be grounds for a war. And basically, the whole world will have to stand up against this tyrant at the same time and basically boycott him and tell him what you've done is a very, very shameful act. And now, how are you going to be responsible and accountable? Because we know you done it, providing that we proved that they did do it intentionally. What are you going to do towards making it up to the rest of the world? This will even put more pressure on China. Let China draw first blood. Let China make their own mistakes. Because it's obvious so far they already have. Whenever you have a society in China that was already rearing up about their communist controlled environment, which is nothing more than slavery. A bunch of tyrants wanting to get rich off the back of slave wages. Whenever you have a society within a society that's already rearing up, you already got problems. Same thing went on in Iran and Iraq. You got the people that's now finally gotten the backbone to stand up against these tyrants to say enough is enough. We're going to be like America. We want to vote in and out the people that we feel comfortable in running our lives. I'm telling you now, communist is dead, and it should have already been nipping at the bud if things would have been handled properly with about 3 or 4 administrations before this administration, beginning and starting at the White House. Things was not handled efficiently and effectively. And because of it, it has put the world in peril. It has put the world where we are right now towards over 3 million deaths over COVID-19. We are now walking off into territory that is not only uncharted, but we are walking into territory that could become lethal in a flip of a switch. That quick. We think we're having problems over here pertaining to meat, pertaining to the shortage of meat. If something big was to escalate or unfold right now, oh my God, we wouldn't just have shortages of meat. We would have shortages of shoes. We would have shortages of TVs. We would have shortages of medication. We would have shortages of clothes. We would have shortages of other type of parts going on automobiles. We would have shortages of almost not everything, but it would sure be a heck of a bump in the road if things escalated to the point that it was basically a knockdown, drag out. This is where we don't want to go with this conversation. We don't want it to go into a knockdown or drag out. Because if people think that they have seen lines now pertaining to food banks, they hadn't seen lines. Whenever you're talking about having to restrain people to the point that basically like they done during World War II, whenever they gave out S&H green stamps because they was restricting people of buying tires. They was restricting people of buying gas. They was restricting people of being able to purchase various things. You had to have privileges to be able to buy tires and gas and other things because everything was being rationed at that time. It was being rationed. And if you think that you've seen lines so far or you've seen hard times so far here in America, you haven't seen hard times if things was to unleash and be on the level of what it could actually escalate off into. It would be a lethal atmosphere on the level of A all the way to Z. That would intensify 1,000-fold. Not only what's going on in our homes, not only what's going on in our neighborhoods, not only what's going on in our states and our nation, but what is going on in the world. There has to be some sort of referee in all this because we are at a pivotal point with so many crucial needs, so many mouths to have to feed. What was the population during World War II? Does anybody know? I think it was give or take about 3 million people. 3 billion people. 3 billion people. We have now doubled, and in some statistics, even come close to tripling of what the population is up onto the planet today. That means that things have become 3 times more critical, 3 times more sensitive, 3 times more crucial, 3 times more imperative that if it falls apart, we think that it was bad during World War II, it will be 3 times as bad of what it was during World War II if things fall apart and something big was to come out of all this. And I'm talking about big as far as an actual knockdown, drag out. And it could actually escalate into a nuclear disaster, depending upon how many buttons somebody wanted to push and who wanted to hold who hostage and who it was in behind the buttons. And from a national intel level, it is terrorizing to even think that this could occur. But who would have ever thought that somebody would have taken a jumbo jet with passengers, regular civilians, and turned 2 jumbo jets into a missile that done a suicide mission on 2 buildings that brought 2 buildings down and killed almost 3,000 people. Who would ever thought that would have ever occurred? And it did. And it did.
It's also noteworthy that late Friday night, when I don't know where this White House thought we're all locked in and at home, Donald Trump fired another IG, Frank Figliuzzi. This one was responsible for a lot of the public record, or record that could become public, about preparing hospitals for a coming pandemic, tied to the intel in that if the White House was warned, if the president was warned, the government should have had more protective gear and equipment, more ventilators, more supplies. She sounded those alarms, and she has now been fired. Your thoughts, Frank?
Yeah, apparently anyone with the title of Inspector General now has some of the shortest shelf life that you're ever going to see in a career. Why? Because Inspectors General represent the truth, the unvarnished facts. This woman had the audacity to report that there were still problems in the supply chain for PPE and hospitals. And for that, she's blamed on not being loyal to the president. And we're still facing this issue with regard to Inspector General for the intelligence community. We just talked about the importance of getting to the truth. When was the president briefed? Who knew what when with regard to the virus? And lo and behold, he's canned the Inspector General for the intelligence community and now for HHS. What they do for a living and what the president stands for are diametrically opposed.
They sure are.
It is a recipe of disaster. It's just like looking at the movie The Perfect Storm. When you have this low and this high and this front and this going on at the same time, you have a recipe. You have a formula that's turning into a catastrophe. I still say, and I'm always going to say, that what went on with the Ukrainian impeachment so-called trials, if you want to call them trials, I don't think it was a trial because there was never witnesses called. I still say that that was all one big distraction. A distraction to the degree that if we wasn't paying such close of attention of what was going on with Donald Trump and the impeachment, Ukrainian hearings and trials, we could have possibly been on top of our game to the point that we would have recognized and identified the severity of the outbreak that was happening over in China along about the first or second week of January. In other words, if we would have had people set up like they were supposed to have been set up with our intel pertaining to Central Intelligence, we would have known within the first few days something was horribly wrong that was happening over in that area pertaining to that containment facility of a major outbreak as far as people getting sick and dying like flies. But instead, we was focused too much on a charade. And this charade is now costing human life. It is so sad.
Frank Viglizzi, Kim Atkins, nice to see both of your faces. Thank you for spending some time with us. After the break, President George W. Bush's call for unity, for some reason, not exactly a welcome one for the current occupant of the White House.
Well, once more, whenever you got the pot trying to call the kettle black, what do you expect? You know, it was the 43rd president that went on the assumption that Saddam Hussein had mass destruction bombs pertaining to either nuclear bombs or something to that degree, that we spent, give or take, what was it, 19 years over there? And $7 trillion? Not counting all the eyes, the arms, the legs that got blown off of people, not counting the psychological damage that happened pertaining to people basically cracking up, breaking up, and not being able to handle that type of pressure. Whenever you got the pot calling the kettle black with young Bush, it goes back to the reflection of the Bible that says that if the blind lead the blind, they shall both leadeth off into the ditch. They shall both leadeth off into the ditch. Why? Because one is just as blind as the other. And one is trying to convince the other that it's okay, I'm on good solid footing, while that entity is actually in the ditch. So whenever you have the pot calling the kettle black, you're not going to have people that's going to pay a lot of attention.
Then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or?
And all he's doing is showing his ignorance by diving off into stuff that he don't know what he's talking about. If anything, it would be more damaging to take his advice than it would be if you just laid in the bed and didn't do nothing.
Almost a cleaning.
The larger challenge we share is to confront an outbreak of fear and loneliness. And it is frustrating that many of the normal tools of compassion, a hug, a touch, can bring the opposite of the good we intend.
In Michigan just yesterday, hundreds of protesters, some of them with long guns, descended on the state capitol as Governor Gretchen Whitmer extended its state of emergency orders till May 28. Today, Trump weighed in with this post, quote, "The governor of Michigan should give a little and put out the fire. These are very good people, but they are angry."
In the final analysis, we are not partisan combatants. We are human beings, equally vulnerable and equally wonderful in the sight of God. We rise or fall together, and we are determined to rise. God bless you all.
And our death totals, our numbers per million people are really very, very strong. We're very proud of the job we've done.
In President George W. Bush's call for unity and action this weekend, he doesn't say anything about Donald Trump. But the obvious contrast between his message and the way Trump has led the country is crystal clear. Even to Trump, he responded to that video from the former president on Twitter. First by quoting an anchor on Fox News who said, "Oh, bye," spelled like bye-bye, the way. "I appreciate the message from former President Bush, but where was he during impeachment, calling for putting partisanship aside?" Then Trump added his own words. He was nowhere to be found in speaking up against the greatest hoax in American history. An attack. Joining our conversation, Bloomberg opinion senior columnist Tim O'Brien, plus former RNC chairman Michael Steele. Michael Steele.
Yeah. Look, the contrast, Nicole, is so stark. The words of President Bush were consoling. They were gathering. I mean, it just kind of drew you into what he was saying with the imagery. And the contrast, where you have a president is about me. How the hell do we reach back to impeachment at a time of coronavirus? That's the best you got in the response to what President Bush said? Yeah, because it's about Trump. And, the country at this point has, I think, had its fill of it. I think the country at this point has thoroughly digested what's at stake here and the kind of leadership that's going to be required to get us through this. This is why the governors are doing so well across the country. And even those governors that, stay close to Donald Trump's skirt are, having to recognize that, okay, we're not going to be able to do this the way Trump would like, and we're not going to be able to do it with the speed because we still don't have the testing in place. The states are still looking for PPEs. So there's still a lot more to this. So that narrative by President Bush really stood out in stark relief at a time where, we're being told to go out and, stand out there and be proud and get back to work and threatening employees who want to safeguard their families and their lives and their livelihood, but don't want to risk going back to work at the time that if they don't, well, we're going to cut you off. It's such a stark contrast from what could have been,
Yeah, I know. Tim O'Brien, I didn't show that video to, I romanticize the man and I still admire the man, but that wasn't the point. I mean, I think that the thread that's been lost is just how far from normal we are in watching Donald Trump. All he's ever done is play president, but watching him try to play president of a grieving, struggling, grasping, hurting country is, for me, searing. And just the fact that he still, week 7, week 8, doesn't see this as anything other than another...
It's dehumanizing. It's absolutely dehumanizing. Because he'll say one thing one day and then contradict it the other. And sometimes he'll say one thing that morning and contradict it later on that afternoon. He does not think about what he wants to say when he says it, or he does not think about the consequences of the circumstances in saying what he says. So it's more than just searing. It really is. It's demonizing to the degree of people not knowing what to believe or who to believe with all these different mixed messages. It's demoralizing. It's demoralizing to any human being that's got any sense at all, that knows that the truth is what sets people free, and the truth is always the best analogy, even if the truth hurts. We sure don't need some big something coming out of the space right now towards a meteor or some sort of major sun flare happening to the planet right now, because lo and behold, Donald Trump would not warn everybody so that they could properly prepare to get things in order with their God. That's the reason why that we pay these people the money that we pay them. Yeah, he may be a bad news barrier, but I'd rather have a bad news barrier than to get caught blindsided. And I feel like that the majority of us feel that way, that's got any type of intelligence. There are certain things that are out of our control.
Forum on which he can grind his many, many axes and carry out his grudge wars against literally every past president. I mean, that video came out. He attacked it by saying, where was Bush during impeachment? He also said he got treated worse than Lincoln. I mean, what are we to do, Tim O'Brien?
Well, I'm actually glad that you brought Lincoln up in this context too, Nicole, because obviously the president had a soiree
Granny
at the
Mary.
Lincoln Memorial this weekend. And as a student of both Abraham Lincoln and Donald Trump, I feel comfortable saying that Donald Trump and Abraham Lincoln don't even belong in the same sentence together, much less the same memorial. You know, Lincoln is this figure who strides across American history like a titan. He has drawn the attention of amateur historians, from John Hay to Carl Sandburg to Gore Vidal, from professional historians like James McPherson and David Herbert Donald and Eric Foner, all of whom understand that he casts this long shadow across American history and that most presidents actually are overshadowed by him. And he is probably the president that every modern president has tried to think about privately of comparing their legacy to Abraham Lincoln, including, I'm sure, George W. Bush. Unlike previous presidents, Trump compares himself to Lincoln out loud. And when you think about who Lincoln was, his intellectual gifts, his oratory, his writing, his deep humility and compassion, all of these characteristics that Donald Trump is sorely lacking in. Yet he has the narcissism, and he's just unhinged and ridiculous enough to routinely compare himself to Abraham Lincoln. He's been doing it since the beginning of his presidency. And it's interesting, on the same weekend when George W. Bush, regardless in this moment of how people feel about his record, reached beyond partisan politics and beyond ideology to say we are facing an epic crisis and we should come together. And Trump chooses to use that moment to continue to divide, to continue to alienate people, because, as you know, what he's in it for every moment of every day is what's in it for me. And, you know, the great lesson of Lincoln is that a purposeful, talented president can marshal our best instincts and the forces of a federal government to solve a problem as serious as the Union falling apart or as horrific as slavery.
Right.
Trump has a moment like that in front of him now, and he's not addressing it effectively.
All right, Tim and Michael are staying with us because after the break, we need their input on this. Despite serious health risks associated with that so-called coronavirus miracle drug, only called by Trump, Trump is still reportedly privately touting its effectiveness. That story's next.
60% of Americans support allowing people to vote by mail-in ballot, including a plurality of Republicans. But many elected Republicans, including the president, are trying to block it. And time is now running out. Industry leaders and election experts say that expanding voting by mail for November could require making commitments in the next few weeks. Congress must act now to fund such voting, and states need to do whatever it takes to make it happen, because people should not have to choose between their health and participating in democracy.
It's tough to quit smoking cold turkey, so Chantix can help you quit slow turkey.